Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast, where we focus on limited play of Eternal the card game. I'm your host, Jedi, aka Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, and this week on episode 13, we're going to be going into one of the new limited archetypes, which is Praxis Sentinels. That's right. They recently redid the drafting format where you are drafting seeded packs for packs 1 and 4, and then doing the Defiance packs 2 and 3. So kind of changed up the format a little bit. Verdict is still out on whether people are really enjoying the format or not. I know a lot of people were really harsh on it initially, but they're starting to come around on it. I am not that great of a drafter, ironically enough, so I am still learning. So any new format is somewhat fun for me. There is appreciation for understanding a format, but starting to break down a new format and figuring out what works for you is also fun as well. Real quick, I want to take a moment just to mention our YouTube channel, that is EJthePodcast, where you can find this podcast as well as plenty of other content like draft videos, sealed videos, constructive videos, pack openings, all kinds of stuff like that. Throwing up a ton of content on there on a regular basis. So if you guys can't catch us live on twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ, harmless plug there, shameless plug, you can definitely check us out on YouTube at EJ the Podcast. All right, guys, let's go ahead and dive right into our pack 1, pick 1. Like I said, we're gonna go ahead and go through all the cards now since we're essentially getting new packs in a new format. It's worth having a discussion over, like I said, each card. So go ahead and crack and open a pack here. We starting off at our commons, we have Scaly Gruon. This is the 1/4 dinosaur for a tune of primal. Yeah, it's fine. It's a filler. You're gonna need some of them in your curve. There are some dinosaur synergies now, but yeah, not really playing the Gruon right away. Next up, we have a Dragon Breath. This is a slow spell for 2 and a blue. Mentor, the student deals its attack and damage to an enemy unit. So it triggers Renown. It works well with Deadly. Of note, it doesn't fight the unit, so the damage is one way. So yeah, Dragon Breath is pretty decent removal if you're the right kind of deck, so I think it's okay. Next up, we have a Wandering Forge, which is the 4/2 Sentinel for 4 and a red. +1/+1 and Overwhelm if you have a relic. This card is not bad. It is one of the cards that we're going to want in the Sentinel deck, as we'll be discussing later, so I think it's okay for first pick. Next up, we have Recogulator. This is the 2/2 Grenadin for 4 and a fire, and Entomb, play 2 1/1 Grenadins. Card is filler, nothing exciting. Go wide strategy isn't as predominant now, I feel like, so yeah, it's passable. Next is Haru Banner. This is the gain primal and justice influence. It's depleted unless you have a unit. It's fine. Seek Power. Draw a sigil from your choice from your deck. It is for 1 and it is a slow spell. I think it's a solid card. Really keeps you open, but you kind of want something with more power. Next up, here's a decent uncommon, is a 4/4 Slope Sergeant Yeti. So it's 6 primal, and it has bond. So if you have a Yeti in play, you can discount the cost of Slope Sergeant by exhausting the unit and using its power or attack to lower the cost. It has, when you bond Slope Sergeant, draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. So looting twice is pretty powerful, especially if you can get this thing out on turns 3 and 4. It could definitely do some work. I think, yeah, I guess you'd have to have a specific set of cards to get out on 3, but you can get out on 4 fairly consistent. I think that's a fine, solid pick. I might actually like that a little bit more than Wandering Forge, just because it pays you off for if you end up going in the Yetis. And the last of our commons is Dispel. Silence a unit, draw a card for 3 at a time. It is a slow spell. Not really excited about taking this early. All right, going into our uncommons, we have Sky Crag Huntsman. This is the 1/4 Explorer Gunslinger for 3 and a red. And pay 4 and exhaust Sky Crag Huntsman to deal 1 damage to an enemy if you have a relic. Yeah, no. We're not taking it. When I do take this card is mainly because I want a 3-cost body, or I need the 1/4 for defense. The special ability is really not relevant. Next up, we have Transmogrifier. This is a 4 and a shadow correction for a relic. Once per turn, you may pay 2 to give one of your units a +3/-2 indefinitely. So it is permanent. So maybe slap this on blockable or something. Just realize that lowering it too low, there are plenty of things like snowballs and pit traps to deal 1 damage. So really not. Still on Slope Sergeant. Our final uncommon is Sandbinder Sentinel. This is a 4/6 Sentinel for 5 double time. And summon, play a Sandbind on an enemy unit with flying, which means it stops it from flying, which I think this card is fantastic. A 4/6 for 5 is pretty solid stats. It has some additional synergies with the Sentinel archetype, which we'll discuss in a moment. And the fact that it gets rid of a flyer, which is typically a big deal in limited, is huge. So yeah, I actually like Sandbinder Sentinel a lot, even if it is double time or a 5-drop. I think it's powerful enough where it's worth first picking over anything else in the pack. And then our rare is Dinosaur Stampede. This is a slow spell for 8 and a time, and your dinosaurs get a +1/+1 this turn for each of your dinosaurs. So if you have 3 dinosaurs, they each get +3/+3. So this card definitely has some power level. But yeah, 8 in limited, and then you're gonna want what, like 4 dinosaurs really for this to be relevant? I mean, don't get me wrong, I could see it being a blowout in certain scenarios, but no, it's just not a thing. So yeah, we're off of it. So yeah, cut and dry, pretty easy pick here. Our first pick will be Sandbinder Sentinel, and then if that was not in the pack, it would be between Wandering Forge, Dragon Breath, and Slope Sergeant. I mean, you could always stay completely open and take Seek Power, but I'd rather not waste a first pick on just straight fixing if we can help it. All right, guys, so that will do it for a pack 1, pick 1. Like I said, it's a brand new format. Interesting things are turning up. People are trying different archetypes and things like that. And you were just kind of getting our bearings on the draft format. So with that, I went ahead and drafted, kind of tried to force a little bit, but it seems to be one of the underdrafted archetypes, and I could see why. Seems like a mid-range. I mean, it can be powerful. I have seen some really strong decks in the format, watching other streamers and stuff like that. But I do think that the fact that your late game is kind of meh makes it to where you are pretty vulnerable to things. So either way, we're going to dive right into it, and it is going to be the Praxis Sentinels deck, or Fire Time primarily. All right, you can essentially splash. The fact that you have access to time means that you have a little bit more fixing than usual, and so that gives you the ability to potentially splash a 3rd color a little bit easier than most other decks would. So that is something to consider. I have not seen too many people get extremely greedy with the splash, like splashing 2 colors or 3 or this and that, because I mean, at the end of the day, you still have to take in consideration that it's limited. You're not running 4 ofs in your deck, so your fixing isn't exactly outstanding. It is good, but it's not like blown away stupendous awesome. And so you really want to be careful and make sure you're not getting a little too greedy with your splashes and whatnot, because at the end of the day, it could potentially nip you in the butt if you do decide to get a little too greedy with your fixing. All right, let's go into it. So what is the Sentinels deck? So the Sentinels deck, like I said just now, it is fire and time based, mainly because these are the 2 Sentinel factions, right? And the step 1 is to have a little bit of ramp / defense in the early game. Like, all the Sentinels are big. There's no small Sentinels. I mean, there's a couple of medium Sentinels, but they are pretty much just big fatties that you want to play and try to take over the game with them, right? So you want to have a significant amount of 2 and 3 drops that can kind of slow down your opponent's game plan to buy you the time you need to get to your big payoff Sentinels. There are also various smaller units that aren't Sentinels, but they do synergize with Sentinels, primarily Explorers. So that is something to take in consideration. You value those a little bit higher when you realize you are going into the Sentinel deck. The next thing is that you want to have a portion of your deck be those mid-range Sentinels that I spoke about earlier, the ones that are kind of in the 4 and 5 slot range. 5 is starting to creep up there, but it's still considered mid-range. So 4 and 5 slot Sentinels, which are typically the ones you would normally play in a standard limited deck to fill out your curve and stuff like that. Things like Surveiller, which isn't an all-star, but can be in this deck. You want these guys to, one, help gum up the board a little bit, but two, enable the bond activation on your larger Sentinels, your 7, 8s, and 9 drop Sentinels. Essentially, having a 4 and 5 cost Sentinel in play can guarantee you that you will be able on your next turn play one of those larger Sentinels, despite not having exactly 8, 9 power through ramp and things like that on the board. So that is another important part of the deck. And finally, the third part is the payoffs, where you are going to want to have a handful, somewhere between 1 to 4, or I would say 2 to 4. 2 to 4 large payoff Sentinels, like huge bodies that the opponent's going to have to double, triple block to get off the board, or eat up a solid piece of removal and things like that. If you're able to weaponize them or somehow protect them for a turn, typically that is enough to win you the game. If you have a great curve where you're able to get one of those mid-range Sentinels out early, and then on turn 4 or 5, bond this huge beefy Sentinel out, the chances are that's going to be too much for your opponent to come back from if they don't have an immediate answer, and you win the game that way. So there is a slight attrition sub-game to this strategy, just because, like I said, if removal is not in your opponent's deck, or they're very scarce on it, then you essentially are forcing them to waste multiple resources to take out your larger Sentinels, still leaving the rest of your board intact. And you can kind of, attrition the game that way. Or if you're able to stick a couple flyers because your opponent definitely can't get past your Sentinels on the ground, then you kind of win out that way. So those are the basis strategies for the Praxis Sentinels archetype, which is in this draft format, which I think people are calling 5.5. So we'll go with that for now. We'll stick to that. As this podcast goes on, I keep making more episodes about various draft formats. We're going to want to have some kind of way to distinguish them and whatnot. So we'll see how I organize that in the future. Obviously, Eternal is a younger game, so a lot of things are still kind of settling. People are still trying to figure out if call the tri-factions by their individual faction name or by the city that they belong to, like Aurelian or Winchester, or if they're going by the display names, Ambition, Wisdom, and things like that. So I've heard all three, so it's interesting to see which one finally ends up sticking in the long run. All right, guys, let's go ahead and start talking specific cards and enablers and payoffs and whatnot, because that is the meat and potatoes of this episode. So what are the enabler cards we're looking for? All right, so let's go ahead and first talk about our early game. All right, these are some of the cards that don't really synergize, particularly with Sentinels, but they do enable us to go into the late game, i.e. it stops us from getting ran over from our opponent, and we can kind of get there, all right? So a couple of things, primarily these are going to be the 2 and 3 slots. There aren't too many exciting ones, but there are some things. Key points that we want to look on the defense side right off the bat are going to be Scorpion and Nocturnal Creeper. These two are really great. They're 1 and 2 slots that take up 1 time, so they fit just about anywhere in the curve. They work really well early, and them having Deadly means that they can stop a lot of the opponent's aggression, regardless of what kind of units they are pushing forward. 2 things I will say about this, though, is that they both have 1 toughness or health, which means they're very susceptible to pitfall and snowballs. So even though they do a good job of stopping the larger justice and fire units and things like that, they aren't completely invulnerable to taking damage and can easily be removed against other decks. As a matter of fact, now that I'm looking down the list, the majority of our early game has 1 toughness. You aren't pissed off about picking up a pack beast. You definitely want to take them early, but the fact that they could potentially let you ramp out an additional power early helps speed up your game plan quite a bit. But once again, 1 toughness and Resolute Monk to an extent. I know this is a primarily aggressive unit, but the fact that it can either pressure your opponent very quickly and early on, so they're playing more defense and buying you time to get to your late game, or the fact that plus it could chip away at your opponent's life total early, so later on only 1 or 2 swings from your Sentinels will finish the job and puts your opponent in a really awkward position. That being said, it also, the fact that it has 3 power means that it could block fairly well and upgrade or trade up, so it is quite important. 2 other ones I want to mention are at the 3 slot is Carnivorous Sauropod and Scorpion Wasp. Scorpion Wasp obviously has been a limited bomb pretty much every time because it is the most solid removal you can have in most respects. I will say that the opponent does have to attack, but in many cases the unit you want to get off the board is attacking anyways. So the fact that it has flying and deadly and an ambush means that it's almost 95% of the time going to get the unit it's trying to go after. It is sometimes a little difficult to leave up because it is 3 power, but occasionally it does it. And lastly, a tricolor card, but Genev does fit in this draft format, is Carnivorous Sauropod. It is 3 faction 3/3 dinosaur. Once again, dinosaurs doesn't really synergize with this format, but the fact that it is a 3/3 for 3 means it can stabilize your board just a smidge to make sure you don't get completely ran over. Also, it has the additional payoff that if you draw it late in the game, you could give a +4/+4 to one of your overwhelmed Sentinels and get in there for a ton of damage, or one of your flyers that we'll discuss about here in a moment. So yeah, that is primarily the early game for the Sentinel deck. There really isn't too much. They're pretty clear-cut picks, honestly. I mean, obviously you can fill them if you are Genev with other random 2-drops like Cartographer and Gruon and things like that, but that is primarily the game plan you're going to go to try to take you into the late game. An honorable mention that we goes kind of more towards the ramp side with Pack Beast than the actual defense side is Trailmaker, which is another limited all-star. It is a 2/1 explorer for 2 at a time, and as long as it's in play, you have +1 maximum power, so it ramps you, and when you summon it, you are able to gain an influence of your choice. So that also is good fixing. Trailmakers pretty much are always valuable in any deck unless time is your splash. All right, guys, that's going to cover kind of like our early game defense aspect of the deck. Next up, we are going to have the kind of slight payoff cards or synergistic cards. Actually, I'll go over and leave all our Sentinels for last. So some of our synergistic cards, once again, that aren't per se Sentinels, but they work well in this archetype specifically because they have synergies with Sentinels. Both include artifacts or relics and units. So covering units, we have things like Serene Excavator. This is a 1/2 flyer Explorer Mystic for 3 at a time. And 1/2 flyer is not that exciting, especially for 3. But if you play a Sentinel, it has Sentinel ally, it gets a +1/+1. So it becomes a 2/3 flyer for 3, which is not bad. It's not bad. It's actually a pretty decent rate. And considering that you have no Sentinels that you really want to be doing on 3, ends up being a pretty decent payoff. If you could start stacking them, they block fairly well, and they can sneak in damage should your opponent gum up the board. Of note, they all are also in time, which means they can be bounced back to your hand and re-trigger the ally. So they could get 3, 4 +1/+1 triggers, or 2 to 3 +1/+1 triggers on themselves if you cast things like Whisper. The next Sentinel payoff is going to be Temple Raider. This is a 2/2 Explorer for 3 in a red. It has charge, so a little underwhelming, nothing exciting, but then a Sentinel ally +2/+2. And a 4/4 charge for 3 is absolutely wonderful. It is a great payoff. So that's another one that you really want. It's kind of underwhelming unless you get the Sentinel ally trigger, but when you do, you are definitely ahead of the curve. So you have to be careful when you value these. They are a little intricate as far as, like I said, they're kind of underwhelming until you're able to trigger it. But they do, if you are in the Sentinel deck, they are almost always going to be a solid payoff for you. And the last unit I'm going to talk about, which is a Sentinel, but it kind of is wonky because it actually goes across 2 decks, is a Monolith Guardian. It is a 1/1 Sentinel, so that's kind of hard to believe, for 4 time fire But whenever you have a relic, it gets a +6/+6. So you potentially could have a turn 4 7/7 Sentinel. This does absolutely amazing with ramping out Bond, as it can make most of your Sentinels cost 1, 2, or even free. So that is fantastic. And having a 7/7 on turn 5 ready to attack is absolutely backbreaking and limited. I do say kind of throw it into the payoff type thing, because it does require a relic, which sometimes may or may not mean you're in a slightly different archetype. Once again, this format does kind of cater to Genev, which puts you in blue. And so all three factions do have relic synergies. So it wouldn't be that hard to get a couple to add to your deck, even if you aren't the quote unquote relics matters deck. All right, that's going to cover that portion for... Oh, I'm sorry. No, I take that back. Let me double check my list real quick. All right, I have one more unit that is Pompous Historian. Pompous Historian is a 3/3 explorer for 4 time. And when you summon, you draw a Sentinel or relic from the top 5 cards of your deck, discarding the rest. So it is a 3/3 body for 4, which is just fine. Nothing great, nothing stellar, but you're not horrible about it. But it has the potential of getting a little deeper into your deck and making sure you draw some gas. So I don't value this one too highly, just because I kind of hate discarding 4 cards to get 1. But in the Sentinels deck, when you are almost guaranteed to hit with this every time, and you have a chance of getting the Sentinel either low cost, if you're still low on your curve, or the payoff one, means they could really make a difference. And half the time, some of the stuff that you're going to be discarding isn't going to really matter. So I do like this card as well. Any card that potentially draws you a card, this one does give you some selection, which is nice, is worth the value. And the body isn't horrible. So yeah, that is the last unit payoff. As far as relics go, which we talk about has slight overlap and synergy with this deck, but these also go very well in the Sentinel package, is first up is Porcelain Mask. This is a 2 and a time for relic. Your units have Overwhelm, and when you summon it, you get to silence a unit in the enemy hand. So this is nice because even though the silence sometimes whiffs, the ability to take out a flyer or a special rare unit that has some special abilities, or even a deadly unit, makes this extremely valuable in the Sentinel deck, because that's essentially how you're going to lose, is if they're able to fly over your Sentinels to get in damage, or if they have deadly units that could essentially chump block and kill your big guy for them only spending somewhere between 1 and 3 power. The additional fact that it gives static overwhelm to all your units is huge as well, as some of these Sentinels, even though the bodies are ginormous, they do not have overwhelm, and your opponent can't chump block them for days. But yeah, that is that's a good payoff. I like it. I like having it in the deck. I think it is a solid card all the way around. You definitely want to play them sooner rather than later, just because you want to definitely hit with the silence effect, but you're not upset when you have to play it late game, and it's a relic. So as we discussed earlier, it does have some additional synergies. And then one of the key removal spells for this deck is Ancient Defense. This is a 4 double fire relic. When you summon it, you deal 3 damage to an enemy. So you can go face if you need to, but it is pretty much their kind of really expensive torch. That's good. It is a form of removal. It triggers relic synergies, but then the payoff is when you play a Sentinel, it gets a +2 attack. So now you're definitely going to play this mainly for the 3 damage, but the fact that it can pump up your Sentinels, whether they're small ones or the big pump ones, is great. Additional power never hurts. It allows you to trade up, allows you to trade more units in like double and triple block scenarios and things like that. If you have the mask, then the overwhelm combos well with it as well. So I think Ancient Defense is solid, and they do stack. So if you have 2 in play, then your Sentinels will get a +4/+0. So that's something to consider. But yeah, that will do it for additional cards that synergize well. One piece of key removal I will talk about before, like I said, we finally get into our primarily Sentinels part, is Predator's Instinct. This deck is a little light on removal in most cases when it comes to straight up like a spell that kills something. If you are in Genev, you can also take Dragon Breath and things like that. So Predator's Instinct is a solid pickup because of the fact that you are playing Sentinels, which means there's a good chance your units are going to be the biggest in the field. And so playing 1 power to take out one of their key units can definitely pay off. Of note, try to do this on when your opponent is tapped out, so you don't run the risk of having a a fast pump spell to ruin this combat for you. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for pretty much the everything but the Sentinels part of this deck. So all these cards pretty much help your boost, your synergize the main game plan, which is getting Sentinels into play in a hurry. So let's go ahead and dive right into our mid-game Sentinels. So these are the Sentinels we're going to play kind of early, low on curve, and they're primarily, even if they aren't the best Sentinels, we are using them to enable the bond effect on our big payoff Sentinels. Most of these Sentinels are going to have 4 and 5 power, which means they make our larger Sentinels 4 and 5 cheaper. And in most cases, that is just huge. So right off the bat, like I said, these are all going to be in fire and time. I'm not going to get too crazy describing most of these, as like I said, their main purpose in the deck is to A, slow down our opponent's aggression if need be, but B, to bond out our really big payoffs. So first up, we have Hardside Cyclops. This is the 4/3 Sentinel for 4 double fire and amplify exhaust a unit. Not really excited about it. It's fine. It's a fine card. You're not horrible about playing it in your deck, but once again, it is just the 4 power that we're looking at. Next up, this one is a little bit better, is the Insistent Automaton. And it is a 4/5 Sentinel for 4 in a time, which is great. 4/5 for 4 is awesome. It blocks well, attacks well, and we can definitely round it out. So, let's see. It is put one of your other units into your hand, which is nice because once again, with Serene Excavator, it can trigger the +1/+1 a second time. It triggers Trailmaker's Influence. It triggers Nightfall on Nocturnal Creeper. So we have all kinds of great synergies with it. And once again, it bonds out for 4. So that's great. Those are some of the cards we're looking at. Of note, both those are uncommon. So you might want to value them a little bit higher. At the common slot, we have Surveiller, which is the 5/2 Sentinel with Pledge. And this one is just great. Like ramping out 4 power on your bigger guys is just huge. It almost guarantees you'll be able to play every card or every Sentinel in your deck on turn 5 if need be. And we have Wandering Forge, which is a 4/2, but could potentially be a 5/3 if you have a relic in play. And so same thing. It's an okay body on its own. With the strangers leaving the format, 2 power or 2 toughness is less of a liability, but it still is a thing. But once again, you can either ramp out something for 4 or 5. So those are great payoffs. And then lastly, we have our combination of at 5, which you can make the argument that they might not necessarily be the ramp cards, but I don't really see them as huge payoffs as well. So they kind of fit this slot, which is Ancient Excavator, which is the 4/6, draw a relic from your void for 5, and the Infused Guardian, which is everyone already knows is a powerhouse in limited, the 4/4 Guardian with Endurance Pledge and Empower +1/+1. So use both these guys to get them out. All right. There are various ones, like I said, at 5, like we talked about earlier. Sandbinder Sentinel as our pack 1 pick one, Stone Shell Walker, and Frontline Cyclops and Power Breach Sentinel. The problem is that all these, once you start getting into 4 or 5 and 6 range, these are starting to be some of your payoff units. Even though they're not amazing, like huge bombs, they are going to take over the game. Stone Shell Walker 5/5/1 for 5 is great on curve, and it still triggers Sentinel synergies, so it's a great card all around. Frontline Cyclops is a beater, and then obviously everyone knows Power Breach Sentinel or Volleyball or Beach Boy are all amazing. So they are definitely strong cards. So they're kind of in the mid-range. Like I said, I kind of put them as payoff / mid-range because they still will help ramp out your really heavy guys that we're talking about in a moment. But yeah, they are perfectly fine in a normal curve deck as well. So there are other Sentinels that you can pick up. A couple of things we're talking about before we finally get to our really big payoff ones. You do have Time Sworn Sentinel, which I kind of like because it draws you a card, even if the body is not super great. And if you need a filler, Dormant Sentinel is fine. I like Dormant Sentinel just because the 7/7 for 7 is fine, but the fact that it has Overwhelm, you can trigger Overwhelm, really helps you get in there. There is Intriguing Ancient. All right, so let's just go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. And then Magmatic Sentinel, which is the 8 cost 7/5 that kills a unit because it deals 5 damage when it comes into play. And in most cases, it will kill the majority of things. So yeah, those are your slight like normal payoffs. And I mean, nothing really exciting there, nothing too great to go over. Those are solid bodies all the way around. Most cases, you could play those in a normal deck as well if need be. All right. The ones I'm about to talk about are the ones that really pay you off, i.e. they can really take over the game, essentially, and win on their own. These are the cards which is why we're potentially playing this deck. Right. So right now, the front runner that everyone is always looking at, and this is the payoff, is Scour Stone Sentinel. This is a 7/8 Sentinel for 9 double time, but it has Overwhelm and Bond. So having a huge unit sometimes gets frustrating when it doesn't have Overwhelm because your opponent can jump block it. But the fact that this has Overwhelm means that it's just going to get in there. It has Bond, and that's what makes it so valuable. If you have a Surveiller on turn 4, and then you play your 5th power on turn 5, you can essentially bond this guy out. So you have a 7/5 Overwhelm on turn 5, and on turn 6, they're ready to swing. So this is the big payoff. You typically want somewhere between 1 to 3 of these in your deck. Any more than that, and I feel like you're your deck will be oversaturated, and you run the risk of having them in your hand and you're not able to play them, because at the end of the day, they still take up your curve, and you have the chance of drawing this before you draw one of your early Sentinels, and then it's going to take you a while to get it out there. The next payoff is Intriguing Ancient, which I feel a lot of people are on the fence about. You are just getting a 4/5 for 8. And so once again, you can bond it to get it out early. So the body isn't that exciting, but when it entombs or when it dies, you get 3 1/1 Explorers, which could trigger other synergies. And I mean, at the end of the day, then that means you're getting 7/8 worth of stats for 8. So it's not bad. And it could also buy you time in the game. So that's another payoff, but the one that's kind of most on the fence for most people. Then you have Pillar of Omar. This is a 5/5 Sentinels for 7 triple time, and it has Empower, play a 5/5 Sentinel. This card is great. It is a complete powerhouse, can totally win the game on its own. Literally every sigil in your deck then becomes a 5/5, and it's very hard and limited for opponent to deal with that much of an onslaught. The card can very easily stabilize you on a board. Unless you're going up against a ton of flyers. The one thing I will say about this one is that, one, you cannot bond it, so you will have to play it with 7 power. And in most cases, I would say 85% of the time, it is correct to hold up until you can play it for 7 and then immediately pay a power sigil to trigger the Empower. Reason being is, if you just play the 5/5 for 7 and it just sits on the board, you're kind of overpaid for it, and it also gives your opponent the window to remove it without getting any value out of it. And then you're going to feel like it was, when you have a game plan rotating around Pillar and then they kill it immediately, it kind of really throws you for a loop, and it's hard to recover from. So in most cases, I typically hold off on playing it until I can play it and then immediately follow up with a sigil to at least get 10 power on the board, 10 worth of stats for 7.5, so to speak, since you didn't really have to deplete the sigil. So that's how I play it, but Pillar of Omar is fantastic and hard for an opponent to deal with in most cases. And finally, we have Forgeborn. This is one of the new Sentinels that came out with Defiance. It is a 7/7 Sentinel for 7 triple fire. It has Overwhelm and Pledge. So Pledge gives you a little bit of insurance about having it. Obviously, you have the chance of drawing it in turns 3 and 4, and it's just going to sit in your hand and rot, and you can't pledge it, but the payoff is huge. The 7/7 Overwhelm for 7 is already a great body. And then if you are able to pay 9, you give Forgeborn a +2 attack this turn for each of your units. So this thing can get up to like 13, 15, 17 power. And the thing is, you can do it over and over again. Chances are you aren't going to do it more than once per turn because it is 9, but you can do it one turn. If that doesn't kill your opponent, then the next turn you could do it again and swing again. So Forgeborn is a great payoff. So those are pretty much your 3 biggest payoffs in the Sentinel deck. Once again, you can use Dormant Sentinel or even Runic Protector to take that slot, but you aren't really excited about it. Those cards are kind of very medium. It kind of happens more if you messed up and ended up being in the wrong, thought you were in the Sentinels deck and you weren't, and or someone might have cut you off and you end up not getting any of the other payoffs. but those work just fine. Once again, you really only want somewhere between 1 to 4 payoffs depending on the curve of your deck. You do have to adjust your power based on how many of these payoffs you have, because they do up your overall curve of your deck. But yeah, guys, that is the Sentinel archetype in a nutshell. There are a little bit of things, obviously, like I said, you can add. I've seen people splash pretty much all 3 colors into it. I've seen a little bit of justice, slapping a mace or that healing hammer on one of your Sentinels is huge. It also gives you access to fall short to compete against other Sentinels and things like that, or flyers. Splashing blue gives you mighty strikes, which is great, as well as some synergies with relics. And then splashing shadow gives you some dark return synergies. You get intimidators and you get plenty of removal. So all 3 colors, additional factions going into comboing with this is great. Like I said, you have a little bit more fixing with Awaken the Ages and Trailmaker and things like that, but I still wouldn't get too greedy with the deck. I think in most cases, you would want to see 1 or 2 of the payoffs or see all the Explorer synergies open before going into this deck. Just seeing like the medium Sentinels isn't really that exciting, but obviously everyone's pick orders are different and things like that. And once you know you are in the Sentinel deck, I would highly value the 2 drops and the things that are going to keep you alive, because in most cases, when the Sentinel deck loses, it loses because of early aggression, not because of anything else, like your unit's not doing enough damage. A couple of rares I will talk about, which are good ways to kind of put you in there. Stirring the Sands is good. It lets you bring back one of your Sentinels and essentially bring back more than one if you have the Explorer synergies. So that's a good one. There is also, where is it? Let me look on my list. Obviously, Moonstone Vanguard is a huge payoff. I mean, endurance, heals when it blocks, draws you cards when it attacks. It has endurance. It's a 5/5 for 5. It's just all around great. So that is something to definitely be on the lookout for. I mean, it will go great in any deck, not just the Sentinel deck, but you know, it's a thing. Copper Conduit is a good payoff as well, where it is a 1/1 over 1 Sentinel, and it gets power and toughness equal to the additional time or power you spend to play it. So you can play it for as cheap as 2, and it will be a 1/1, or if you play it with like 5 power open, then it will be a 4/4. So yeah, definitely something to look for. Let me double check my list, make sure I didn't miss any other rare payoffs. Nope, that's it. Those are pretty much the ones that I think you really want to be on the lookout for. There are a couple of other rares, but they're either really expensive or don't play out as well as you think they do. So that's why I didn't mention them on the podcast. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for this show. Just give you a slightly in-depth run by it. I'm sure it can go as the format goes on. I can get a little more feedback on it and get it out to you guys. Next week, depends what archetypes I'm going to try to force, so to speak, quote unquote, force this week to discuss next week. Going to try either FJS or Winchester Gunslingers or the Dinosaur deck, which is base Elysian. So I'll give those a shot. I have heard that the Recano Flyers / Armory thing is still a thing. So I'll take a look at some of those decks and see what's the next one. I will eventually get around to discussing all of them, so you guys are informed. But yeah, that is it. So real quick, let me cover social media. You can catch me on Twitter and YouTube at EJthePodcast. If you want to see my, by all means, message me all you guys want. I am trying to be very interactive. We do have a Discord up and running, but sadly I don't have like a specific, like the link is, one of those weird internet names. So you'll have to go on my Twitch or on the show notes and stuff to click the Discord down below. So you can join that and talk to me all the time, as well as other great people. If you want to see my real life stuff like my circus and fire performing and things, you can catch me at CaesarLeBear7 on Instagram. And then of course I am streaming live every Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday, probably adding either Thursday or Friday to my rotation, probably Thursday, at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. I want to give a quick shout out to Limited Resources for being the inspiration for the show. And of course, Marshall is fantastic, and LSV is one of the designers for this game. You can catch them on Limited Resources. They talk about Limited in Magic the Gathering. All right, guys, that is it. Appreciate you once again tuning in this week. I appreciate your support, having fun seeing you guys in stream and in chat, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time, keep on gaming.